Hey guys, what's going on? So today I have an album review for Deeds of Flesh's Path of the Weakening. Background listening to Brodican, Instruments of Torture. Classic Deeds of Flesh album, of course. If you're into Deeds of Flesh, you should know this album. Not my favorite, it's probably one of my least favorites out of their first 5, but it's still really damn good. It's just, I think the other ones, I'd say this is like my second least favorite. I think Mark of the Legion is probably my least favorite out of the classic era of Deeds of Flesh, but this is still a great album. But anyways, cool album cover from John Zig, of course. Not my favorite. I'm not really that big on like snowy kind of album covers, but still a nice album cover. There's the back. Track listing, you got Indigenous to the Appalling, Mutinous Human, Lust Moored, Path of the Weakening, Summarily Killed, Sound of Loud Rains, Execute the Anthropophagy, I Die on My Own Terms, Sense of the Diabolic, and A Violent God, put out through Unique Leader. Kind of weird how there's no clear jewel case on this one. There is for all their other albums. I don't know why they didn't do it for this one, but what can you do? I like that disc cover. Of course, nothing behind it. Picture of the band right here. Really like those like old school brutal death metal photos where it's just like a bunch of dudes with like fucking cargo pants and beanies and hoodies in like the forest. So like so much charm to it, I guess. You have all the lyrics. The lyrics are a little less gory on here, I'd say, compared to like the first 2 albums and the Gradually Melted EP. Another cool band photo there. And I'd say this one's a little less focused on being like brutal, because the first 2 albums are really fucking heavy, and this one is probably just as heavy, but it's not as like menacing sounding. I'd say it's a little more kind of melodic in some parts and a little more like epic sounding. Don't get me wrong, it still has an edge to it like any other brutal death metal album, but I'd say it's a little less horror focused. You know, like Trading Pieces, you got like gore lyrics, and same thing with Inbreeding, you have like, you know, the classic Bring Your Children, Let Me Kill Them. There's not really that much like that on here. There's not as many like chuggy, fast, not slammy, but you know what I mean, those kind of parts that Deeds of Flesh usually have. This one's mostly trem picked, mostly like, you know, blast beats and double bass. The drums are a lot louder in the mix than usual on here. I think this is the same guy from Trading Pieces, because I know he wasn't on Inbreeding the Anthropophagy. And you know, everything that you'd expect from a classic Deeds of Flesh album is on here. Crazy, really frantic sounding tremolo picked riffs. I kind of stuttered there, sorry. You know, really awesome vocal trade-offs between Eric Lindmark and Jacoby. You know, Jacoby just has these really feral, really awesome highs. Some of my favorites, and some of my favorite highs in death metal in general, really. But yeah, this is a really fast album for sure. Maybe not as technical as Inbreeding as well. This one's really easy to get into, and it doesn't grow on you quite as much as the other ones do, which I think is why it's one of the weaker out of the early albums. But I'd say the first 3 songs are really good, especially the title track. It's probably the best song here. There's a really cool little bass break in there. The bass is a little bit less thin and trebly sounding on here. It has a little bit more low end on here. And this album in general is a little bit less thin than the first 2 albums production-wise. The drums being a lot punchier and louder in the mix. Especially the kicks are a lot more triggered. They're not really clicky sounding though, like on the earlier albums. You know, the 2 before this is still early Deeds albums, came out in what, like 1999. I believe this was also the first release to ever be done through a Unique Leader. Not this pressing, of course, but this album. What else could I really say about this? It's kind of a difficult one to review because there's not that much about this one that stands out compared to the other Deeds of Flesh albums. I mean, a lot of their albums really sound the same in their classic era, but this one just isn't the strongest. You know, there's a lot of those really swingy triplet blasts. There's a few little slower parts, like the beginning of the title track, Path of the Weakening. The second this album starts, there's no intro or anything. It just goes straight into, you know, speed with Indigenous to the Appalling, Mutinous Human. Yeah, this is a really good album. I feel like it's not quite as like aggressive as the early stuff, and not quite as dark as they would get on like Gradually Melted. This one is a little bit of a transition, I'd say. This one and Mark of the Legion, because I think they perfected this kind of sound on not Gradually Melted, Reduced to Ashes, excuse me. Because this one is like, it has a little bit of that dark kind of melody to it, but it's not quite as strong as it would become later on. But it's still really cool on here. There's a lot of stuff like that. A lot of great songs on here, though. Like I said, I Die on My Own Terms, Path of the Weakening, Indigenous to the Appalling. It's just not as memorable as the other stuff. I don't know if maybe I need to listen to it more. I've spent a pretty good amount of time listening to this album, though. And it's really great. You know, it's everything you want from Deeds of Flesh, like I said. You know, a lot of triplet blasts and just ridiculous drums that almost never slow down. A lot of awesome, really, like, fast bass, you know, awesome tremolo pickers, like I said. Really frantic sounding, killer vocal trade-offs. That's all here. But I feel like on this album, it's not quite as, like, intense as it is on some of the other stuff. Even the albums after this, I feel, are a little bit more dark in feel. This one's a little bit of a transition. It's still really fucking good, but not quite as strong as the other stuff. It's just kind of your average Deeds of Flesh, like early Deeds of Flesh album, which is not a bad thing. That's still a really great album. This is still one of the best brutal death metal albums. I just feel like the other albums are a little stronger in this one. I think out of 10, I'd probably give Path of the Weakening a 7.5, maybe an 8. It's really fucking good. It's just not the strongest Deeds album. I feel like the ones after this, the ones before this, are a little better. But it's still a killer album, though. You know, they had those traces of melody, but they weren't quite as strong as they would become, and they don't have as much of like brutal, really low vocals and the really like chuggy parts that you had on like Trading Pieces and stuff. Still, though, awesome album, though. If you're into Deeds of Flesh, this is an essential listen because it's one of their classic albums. Of course, they have a great discography. I'd say everything up to and including Crown of Souls, it's pretty much flawless. And then the last two albums after Jacoby left and they went more technical death metal aren't as strong. They're still good, but I don't really care about them. And of course, the Gradually Melted EP, their debut release, is like amazing as well. That's it for this review, though. It's kind of a difficult album to review because there's not much I can say about it. It's just a really good Deeds of Flesh album, but not quite as good as the other ones. So yeah, Deeds of Flesh, Path of the Weakening, 7.5 out of 10. Hope you guys enjoyed this video. Sorry it was a little shorter than my usual review length, but there's just really not much I can say about this album. But yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed. Like I said, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe. See you next time. Bye.